let's get into that first story I mentioned. And, us being Australians, you're probably going to be impacted a bit more with it than me because I don't live in Australia anymore. So, Optus. Optus is a big telco. They hold on. I forgot to mute it. And it just started playing in my ear. So there's this story that released. Optus, a big telco, one of the three major. Pretty sure there's Telstra, Optus, and Vodafone. I think that's it. I don't think there's another one. But they had a big outage. We spoke about them probably about 6 months ago or so when they had some hacks in their system and how the CEO responded to that. And I think we want to talk about how the CEO has responded to this instance. But I want to talk more about the business people. There was this report on ABC News that there was this report about a local snake catcher. Yeah, interesting character. And he was affected because he's an Optus customer, and there was an outage. Actually, Dr. Rod, can you remember? I forget now. I did the research, but now I've forgotten how long the outage was for.
Oh, it was for the best part of a day, as in like 12 hours. It started about 4:30 in the morning. It wasn't rectified until quite late in the day. So, yeah, it was very significant because it affected business hours.
Yeah, and so it wasn't just the phones were out. The data was out as well, so people couldn't use their phones. And this is a story about a gentleman who runs this business, how he said he couldn't use his phone to use the maps to get to his clients. He couldn't call them. He couldn't contact them. He couldn't go online and try to get access to his calendar and all those sorts of things that we take for granted when we have our mobile phone. But they had this outage which affected all customers that weren't able to access phones. It also impacted emergency service calls and all those sorts of things. So first of all, looking at the business owner, because we'll get into the actual the company side of it in a moment, but as a business owner, there are these things that happen. Our internet will go out, our phones won't work, car breaks down, however we want to say it. There are these external forces that are out of our control that do happen. And this person, I mean, obviously they're playing it up, they're over-dramatizing it and everything like that. But this person, was talking about how hard it was. He couldn't do his work for the day and he lost customers and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff, right? But how should we respond to these sort of external, as business leaders, how should we respond to these sorts of things?
Well, you should plan for it. You should have contingency plans. But this was really difficult to get around because it not only did it mean your mobile phone didn't work, but you had no internet either. So effectively, if you were an Optus customer, you had absolutely no means of communication whatsoever, unless you're prepared to hand deliver something to a customer. So it was very significant. Service stations, if you went to fill up your car, they had little signs out that said cash only, very sorry. So you can't avail yourselves of the opportunity to pay at the pump with a credit card or even go inside the shop with a credit card. And if you're like me, these days you don't usually carry more than maybe a couple $100 in cash. And so it inconvenienced not just individual businesses, but customers as well. So look, it is very, very difficult to plan when so many systems go out. So you can have a contingency plan in case your internet goes out, because you should still have mobile phone service. If your mobile phone service goes out, you should have internet access. But if both go out, then you've got nothing. Yeah. And that was the problem that people experienced with their Optus service here.
So I mean, one of the key things that you mentioned is kind of like, I would say the drum that I would bang is we as leaders have to have contingencies. We have to have contingencies. We have to pre-plan for worst case scenarios. And if we haven't actually thought about that, if we haven't planned ahead for those things, then if they happen, we're dead in the water. Or I think that's the key of being a leader is we can, forward, forecast, I suppose, and try to predict any possible scenario and have contingencies for it. Now, to what point do we do that?
Well, see, that's always a matter of trying to weigh up the costs against the benefits. Look, I think on reflection, what I would be inclined to advise businesses would be get yourself something like a 5G pocket Wi-Fi from a different provider.
Yeah.
That's what we actually do at church. I've got two systems at church. We don't actually have internet access where we are for various reasons, partly because we sublease the building that we're using, and we can't get a second internet service at that address. But I have a 5G system which works on one provider's network, and I actually have another 4G system which works on a different provider's network. And in fact, just 2 Sundays ago, the 5G network went down. We had absolutely no access to the internet whatsoever. I was able to switch over to the 4G backup system, and our church service was able to proceed unhindered. Now, it probably didn't matter all that much if we had to ditch all of our audio visuals for a Sunday service because we're a small church and I don't even need a microphone. But I think this is illustrative of how it's relatively easy to get around something like this. At least you could have had access to the internet through a different provider. So that would be my recommendation. But you need to plan contingencies. And my backup system costs me $35 a month to run.
Yeah.
So it's not very expensive at all.
Yeah.
But you've got to think about these things and think, well, okay, what if my systems go down?
Yeah.
What can I do, and how much is it going to cost me to mitigate the effects of something like losing the service? I think in this case it's not too hard. But look, if you're running a railway system and you're dependent on Optus, as apparently was the case in Victoria, then the whole rail commuter system will go basically into shutdown. And I think that's what happened there. So for a small business, just have a backup system. It won't cost you very much. For a very large operation like a railway system, it's not going to be so easy.
Yeah, I mean, look, the small business idea is reasonably easy. Like, for example, if your FPOS machine goes down because it doesn't have internet, you can get like little dongles you can use on your phone and stuff, and you just have a spare one in your shop. But you're talking, once again, when we talk large scale organizations, how do we do that? Because a contingency system for them is a whole nother system, which would be hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Is that feasible? Is that practical?
Well, so you've got to weigh up the likelihood of a risk event happening together with the cost to your business, the likely cost to your business. And then, so that'll give you a bit of an idea of what it will cost you. Then you can work out how well that stacks up against the benefits of your preventative strategy. But look, sometimes overall, you just carry the risk.
Yeah.
The costs of mitigating the risk are higher than the costs of not doing anything about it. So you just accept the risk and away you go. The important thing, though, is that you've thought about it and you've made some attempt to weigh up the costs and the benefits associated with risk mitigation. Yeah.
So we spoke about, I think it was last week or a few weeks ago, we spoke about risk assessments and making sure that we have those in place. It is really a cost balance between that. Is like, there's not only the cost of the system, but because, I mean, we could spend so much time just creating contingencies for everything. Like, I used to have an events management business, and actually even while coaching, we run a lot of events, and I used to have contingencies for almost everything because it was an event, and I kind of knew there was paper backup systems for everything that we needed, and all those sorts of things. We had most things covered, extra batteries, all those basic things. But there is actually a time investment into those things as well. And when you're running an organization, you go, is it worthwhile my time, investing time myself or investing time for my staff, creating all these contingencies for things that are 1%ers? Now, an internet service going down, well, actually, to be honest, an internet service going down is actually quite common. So that, you know, like they go down all the time. This was a bad one, but they go down all the time. So planning for those contingencies, if we haven't planned for them. Now let's talk about it happens. What do we do as a leader? We haven't prepared for it. Something bad's happened. We've lost all internet, you know, everything like that. What do we do as a leader?
Well, if you can't communicate with anybody, there's not much you can do, actually. So that really does make it very, very difficult. But generally speaking, the key is to communicate with your people, including your customers, your staff, as well as your customers. Communication is everything when something like this goes wrong. And of course, there's been a lot of criticism of the Optus CEO for not communicating very early on. She should have had some communication out at 4:30 a.m. in the morning, at the very least, advising that there'll be a press conference at 8 a.m. in the morning or something like that. But as you know, a business like Stuart, the snake catcher, pretty hard when he can't communicate with his customers. And you see, I know a little bit about snake catchers because I've had them at my own home, and we have some of the most venomous snakes in the world here in Australia. And if you get a brown snake or a tiger snake in your house, you definitely want the snake catcher there as quickly as possible, unless you're brave enough to tackle it yourself.
Which we don't recommend. That's not a recommendation for us.
But these snake catchers are not like dentists. They don't have a list of regular clients.
Yeah.
People call their local snake catcher when they have a snake in their property. Mm-hmm. So for him, very, very difficult. Very, very difficult, because he can't communicate with anybody. They can't communicate with him. And if you've got a snake in your property, what are you going to do? I mean, I'd be inclined to stand on the dining room table.
So you mentioned the CEO there. Let's talk about her for a moment, because we were talking about her 6-8 months ago, however long it was, when they were hacked. And we were praising her for her communication.
No, we weren't.
The way we were, weren't we?
No,
I thought we were.
No. She was terrible. And look, there's a class action in the courts right now, as a matter of fact, and that's been in the newspapers over the last few days. No, the biggest criticism of her was she didn't come clean. She didn't communicate early on. And that just compounds all the issues. And the same thing has happened again. No communication. And look, there'll be more class actions. And I understand that they're losing a lot of customers now. People are just walking, because it's relatively easy to transfer to another provider.
Yeah.
In fact, if you walk into a shopping centre, you'll often find the three main providers with shop fronts within 100 metres of each other.
Yeah. All happy to offer a great deal for you to transfer.
But look, she's just repeating the same performance as she did with the data breach. Not enough communication, and not enough communication early enough. Look, you have to come clean. This particular problem affected some 10 million customers. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And even if all you can say is, you know what, we've got a problem. We don't know what the problem is, but we do know what its effects are. What it means is we can't provide any service of any kind to our customers. And we're going to update you as soon as we have more information about, one, what the problem is, and two, how soon we can fix it.
Yeah. So one thing we can learn from this, from both Stewie the snake catcher and also the CEO of Optus, is communication is key. Whatever happens with these external forces, is you have to communicate. You have to communicate with your team. You have to communicate with your customers. Whenever something goes wrong, you have to communicate. And so there's always ways you can get around it. I'm just trying to think about it, like, yeah, but we can't communicate because he doesn't have a phone. Well, go and knock on the neighbor's door or whatever, or go down to the local library and jump on the computer there, and hopefully the local library isn't on
They're
Optus
on
as
Optus,
well.
same sort of problem. But look, I guess by going to your neighbours, you can at least figure out whether there's a general problem or whether the problem is happening at your end.
Yeah.
But for the snake catcher, Stuart the snake catcher, his business is quite unique in that it's very unlikely that he's got a book of regular customers. So even if he had an alternative system, he sending an email out, well, one, a lot of his customers wouldn't have received it because their system was
Optus
down.
as well.
And two, if he hasn't actually got a database of regular customers, he's not going to have a list of people he can contact anyway. The only thing that I would say was if he had an alternative system, he could have put a notice up on his website. That's about all he could have done.
Yeah. Or on social media.
Difficult. Something like that.
Yeah.
Pretty difficult. Yeah, pretty difficult.
Now, also, I suppose with that, then, if we're talking about contingencies, we then need to talk about the financial contingency as well. Because, okay, something happens to your business and you can't earn any money for the day. Well, if you're living week to week or month to month, then that's when those things are going to affect you. But when you build up margin and build up some savings and make sure that there's an extra budget for rainy day things like Optus going down, that's also a contingency as well. That I think that as leaders, we need to make sure that we have the financial buffer to be able to handle these challenges as well.
Yes, indeed, and it's easier for medium and larger firms to do this because they've got a bit of cash flow and they can manage that reasonably effectively. But I know a lot of people who are in very small businesses. They're a family business, one-person operation. It's a really tough world out there for the small business, especially what I would call the micro business.
Yeah.
And one of the things that worries me so much is that you and I can give people advice such as we've just done. It is so hard for a very small business because honestly, so many of them are just surviving day to day. They don't have contingency funds. I know, as householders, we should have enough to cover our expenses for about 6 months, somewhere between 3 and 6 months. In business, certainly you should be able to cover at least your payment cycle, which would normally be 30 or 60 days, maybe 120 days. But it is very, very difficult for micro businesses.
It is, but as a business coach, I've got to say, I've worked with thousands of businesses over the years, and I've met a lot of business owners that are those micro businesses. They are struggling. They are going week to week. But when I challenge them to go, hey, you got to build up that buffer. You got to be able to start, cut out your coffee each day. Cut out just quit your Netflix. Whatever it is, just those small things. And every one of them that actually is intentional about building it up. Now, it may take them a while to build it up, but over time they do build it up. And so I suppose I want to jump on and just go, don't use that as an excuse that because you're a micro business that, we're struggling week to week, so we just can't do it anyway. You can. If you get disciplined, make some sacrifices, and you can slowly build up. Maybe it may end up only being a couple of $100 or $1,000 or a couple of $1,000 in the bank account rather than being months and months and months worth like we're talking about. Ideal, yes, in business we say 3 months is the ideal, but it's not always possible. But it's those small changes, you can get there. You can over time.
You can still buy your pastor a cup of coffee though, all right?
And still pay your tithe.
Don't cut that out.
And still pay your
well,
tithe.
Actually,
I'll say that.
Well, no, I'd be heretical enough to say if you can save your business by not paying your tithe for a couple of months, do it.
Yeah.
If one of my own people came to me and said, look, we're really in dire straits, I wouldn't think any of the less of them if they didn't tithe for a couple of months.
Yeah.
I could go into great detail about that. And I know some pastors might say, you're absolutely wrong on that one, Rod, because, God will come in and supply a miracle. And that does happen sometimes. And probably this is something we could spend a whole podcast on. But I was only joking when I said still buy your pastor a cup of coffee. If your business is really only kind of surviving from day to day, I think your pastor should be buying you the coffee.
Well, I think that's also the point is sometimes, and I know as a business owner, I feel the pressure to be able to tithe sometimes, and not. So I don't tithe sometimes. I tithe, but there are those tough months where I still want to. But in reality, if your business isn't earning any money, then you've got nothing to tithe on anyway. But we still, I try to force myself to still give the same amount every month, no matter what's happening. And I do have conversations with you sometimes to go, this month and actually that's probably a little bit of a side note as well for you, is if you are a business owner, make sure you have open communication with your pastor. Because number one, when I don't have the funds to pay my tithe or my offerings for that month, I talk to my pastor and I tell him, hey, you won't be seeing that money coming in this week, this month. I'm, we're tight, we're behind or whatever. Now, one, that's a good relationship to have with your pastor. But number two, then he can pray for you, which is the whole point of having a pastor. Your pastor should be involved in your business. That's why I love Dr. Rodden. While I'm on the opposite side of the planet, he's still my pastor, because we have that relationship, because he understands business and he understands being able to pray for businesses and stuff, and he does that for me. And
just really quickly, just on the whole tithe thing, just in case there's some pastors watching as well, and if you want to get all Old Testament about tithing, there is a provision that if you don't tithe, if you miss tithes, you can pay it later. And you add 20% to it. That's the general principle of compensating for any time you miss your tithe or any other payment. So look, if it really bothers you a lot to postpone your tithes or not to pay tithes, the Old Testament standard was, well, when you can, you pay it and you add 20%.
That's good. I like that. I
wouldn't get too legalistic about it, David.
Well, talking about Optus has turned into a tithes message.
Well, you never know where this podcast will go, do you?
We never know. Well, look, just make sure you got contingencies. As a leader, have contingencies in as many areas as you can, finances being one of them. Make sure all your systems, you've got backups for things. I've got everything in clouds, and I've got things in multiple clouds. I've got, different accounts for things, and I've got things on different devices and everything like that, that if something goes down, then there's a contingency for it. Like in this studio, I've got batteries on everything, like UPSs on everything, that if we lose power, which does happen quite often, and actually that's another thing we're talking about, like how likely is it to happen? Well, here in the Dominican Republic, the power goes out usually once a day, and so I've got UPSs that can run my whole studio. That if it goes out and there's a generator in the building and everything like that, we've got the contingency. So maybe it's systems, maybe it's processes that we need to have right, maybe it is finances that we need contingencies on. But when you are impacted by external forces, make sure that you're pre-planned with those contingencies. And when it does happen, make sure you have good communication with your team, with your suppliers, with your customers, with everyone who's impacted. Make sure you can have good communication. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you've liked that, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any thoughts of how it challenged or helped your leadership, put a comment below, and we'd be honored if you would consider subscribing for more leadership content. Also, make sure you check out the playlist for more episodes like this.